Hi, everyone. I hope you were able to process. I know that's very, very intense to consider that first part of this path of descent, this letting go process. Please understand, if you have 1,000 arguments against it, I I don't hold that against you. You may be right. I may be right. We both may be right. And so I hope that you'll you'll give yourself permission to let that process be ongoing. Nobody could expect you to uh, have fully processed uh, the what we considered in those few minutes a little while ago. Um, I'd like us to move to the second part of this process, a letting be process. I'm not expecting you to be there. Um, but I'm inviting you to imagine what it might be like to be there in this letting be process. A period where we move beyond our desperate quick fixes and easy answers. If you think of it being in that descent process, we don't want to go to the bottom. We want to jump over and get going up again as soon as possible. We like going up. It's understandable. But when we say, I need to let this happen. I've tried all my desperate quick fixes. I've looked for all my easy answers. Let me see if I can bear a little more reality. And part of that reality is the unknown. We talked about those four scenarios. You might say, I know it's got to be scenario one. But when you reach the point where you say, I don't know which scenario it will be, and being able to settle into unknowing. It's something we don't have a lot of practice with. We like to jump to conclusions whenever we can. To have our eyes open to say, there's a lot I don't see, and I'm willing to suspend my closure and be willing to have some unknowing going on here. And then in that process, when we begin to descend to that bottom, we, in a sense, we marinate there long enough. We let the process work on us long enough that we can disentangle ourselves from some of the assumptions of our current civilization, the values, the stories, things that are so deeply embedded in us, we may have never, ever been able to see around them for even an instant before. Look, I can tell you this process is real because I've been experiencing it in the process of writing the book and processing it and speaking about it. Uh, this this thing that happens in the letting be phase is very profound and very meaningful. And there's a certain way it's painful, but there's a certain way it's liberating and very beautiful. When I was working on the book, I uh, re-engaged with something I guess I'd seen back in biology class years ago. Um, but it's often called the adaptive cycle. It's a pattern we see in nature, a four-phase pattern, an exploitation phase. Exploitation doesn't have a negative connotation here. It means there's an energy source that's made available. And when the Bible began with "Let there be light," they knew what they were talking about because everything begins with the availability of energy. And if we're talking about life, it's light energy. That's what gets everything going. And then things exploit available energy. Living things exploit available energy, and then they try to conserve their monopoly on that available energy. They don't give up without a fight because their whole life or way of life depends upon it. But eventually conditions change and they go through a release phase. And that release phase means they release the energy they've had a monopoly on, which creates new possibilities for new organizations of that energy, which then gets the process going again. A lot of us were exposed to this back in biology class with the stages of forest succession. You imagine a volcano happens and magma spreads across, and the earth looks dead like a moonscape. But it doesn't take but a season or two, and we start to see some lichen and some little pioneer plants that get a foothold, and then they drop their seeds, and there's another foothold, and eventually some perennial plants can take root, and so the land can actually sustain life all through year after year. And then we have shrubs and small woody pioneers grow, and then short-lived pioneer trees. And eventually a climax forest may return. And that climax forest may last for centuries, millennia, occasionally. But eventually something happens and destabilizes that climax forest, that mature forest. It might be a new insect comes and weakens the trees and has just enough dead trees so that when a lightning strike hits, the forest burns down. It might be a bacterium or a virus that finds it can just thrive in this forest. And that leads to uh, a new beginning. That process repeats itself. And now all of those resources, the energy that was stored in those tall trees is brought to the ground and made available to other creatures to exploit again. Not only that, but now that the canopy is gone, sunlight comes in, huge sources of energy, and the process repeats itself. Interestingly, it's not at the same starting point it was back with the volcano, because now after centuries soil is built up. So it's a slightly it's a richer environment in many ways for this new beginning to happen, and it will run its course and the process will continue again when we broaden our our time frame and our frame of reference. We can start to see, yes, of course, these are processes that are part of nature. Um, and then we dare to ask the question, what if civilizations go through processes like this too? And what if our civilization has had a long exploitation phase, a long conservation phase, and now is maybe entering the release phase? What will that mean? What will it mean for us, however old we are? What will it mean for our children, our grandchildren, our faith communities, our careers, our expectations of what the future holds? What if that's part of the doom feeling that terrifies people, that they don't want to have to accept that a reality might be happening and that they don't desire or prefer? What if millions, hundreds of millions, billions of people are going to go through this kind of realization, this kind of shakeup to their normal assumptions in the coming years and decades? Could this be the conditions that will lead many to cluster around authoritarian leaders, con artists, deceivers? Um, Coming from my side of the pond, you can understand how I feel I'm watching my culture as a giant petri dish to see what kinds of things are growing in this condition of anxiety and stress when we're, I think, in the very early stages of a release phase. What if what we thought of as religion at a deeper level was a set of spiritual practices, as my friend and colleague, Dr. Barbara Holmes says, that they're practices of crisis contemplation? What if our religious communities actually emerge primarily during times of collapse, of release and reorganization? That's the seedbed for spiritual vitality and growth and revolution. And that spirituality is what helps us survive the collapse of an old system. Um, what if just as many people are about to or have given up on religion, we're entering a time when we need spiritual vitality, not in the shape of our old conservation era religions, but we need the spiritual seedbed for something new to emerge. In the book, the chapters that I that addressed this letting be, this being at the bottom of the path of descent, um, the chapters were learn to see, learn to behold, wake up and see things once some of your blinders of your inherited civilization begin to drop away. Um, those of us who come from civilized societies, now we have to look at the wisdom that indigenous people, our indigenous ancestors knew, but we have long since forgotten, and that civilizations have tried to wipe out wherever that indigenous wisdom exists. But now suddenly we need to humble ourselves and see the great wisdom that our ancestors had. That could actually help us rediscover the Bible in a new way. Um, I've come to see the Bible as a collection of indigenous wisdom that people were trying to preserve in a time when one civilization after another was trying to conquer them and exploit them and enslave them. We develop the capacity for non-dual thinking, where we learn to get out of our old knee-jerk reaction into putting everything into good or bad categories. Um, there's something that happens as we broaden our time spans, that we begin to see the brevity of our own lives, and we face our own mortality in a deeper way. And we face, in our current situation, our own powerlessness. Those are some of the subjects that I engage with in part two of the book. Now, for you all, um, you might ask some questions like this: what might make it hard for us, our group, to let be, to dwell in unknowing? If we don't let be deep enough and long enough, what unhelpful ideas, values, assumptions might we bring along from our unsustainable civilization? How might we rediscover the Bible as a collection of anti imperial indigenous wisdom for these times? And how might coming to terms with our mortality and powerlessness be important in this process? So I hope those questions will be helpful for you as as you consider and converse and reflect, um, and you can recognize this age-old path of descent and the importance of letting be, of learning what we need to learn at the bottom. I hope that will be useful for you.